Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 for another ship review in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about the Graf Zeppelin, the Tier 7 premium German aircraft carrier. For this review, we'll start with some analysis, look over the stats, and then get into some gameplay. Please check out the description for the ship's history once it becomes available. Graf Zeppelin is the first carrier in World of Warships Legends at Tier 7 that you can purchase from the store rather than earn it through the Bureau. If you're thinking, though, that your donation to the store will improve your experience, I've witnessed no evidence of that having played it for the last week. And if you want some aggregated data in infographic form, you should stick around through the stats portion of this video. In any case, the Graf Zeppelin is a ship of uncharacteristic proficiency on PC, and it largely fails to live up to even that in World of Warships Legends, and is without a doubt one of the most frustrating premium ships I've ever played. As far as what the ship has going for it in-game, Graf Zeppelin first and foremost is a reasonably stealthy ship. She ties to Shokaku for best concealment from spotting by both air and sea. She's also got decent speed and maneuverability, clocking in at 32 knots. She also features a relatively protected citadel that is low in the water, relatively small, and behind turtleback armor. Unfortunately, the enemy carrier has not a lot of reason to come looking for you because the Graf Zeppelin may very well have the worst set of planes that you can possibly find on any carrier at Tier 7. This is due mostly to their incredibly absurd turning circle, which takes away any speed and HP advantage and just turns them into XP farms for the enemy team. They feature a strange targeting reticle and slower torpedoes than you can find on August von Parseval. But if someone does mercifully come looking to kill you, the Graf Zeppelin has fairly poor AA, so she more or less has to rely on her combat air patrol to keep her safe from getting totally wrecked by the enemy carrier. I will also say I personally consider both the high-octane fuel and precise bomb descriptions to be perhaps factually accurate but potentially misleading, and I will go into more detail on that in the stats. As a Tier 7 carrier, I imagine this appeals mostly to folks who are into carrier gameplay, but for some reason lack the patience to earn the Kaga or Saipan, both of which are probably more effective carriers that you can earn for free from the Bureau. After that, I imagine this ship is interesting to hardcore German players and people generally interested in the ship's history more than player experience. As we look into the stats, I'm going to be brief on most subjects here, briefer than I usually am. Anyway, needless to say, the most important part of the aircraft carrier in the game is not the actual ship, but rather its Airgroup, which might appear to be okay based on the stats that you can see in the store, but which is absurdly not great if you analyze it in any other way. Overall, the survivability of Graf Zeppelin is good, with 52,600 hit points. This is about as average gets, but the armor scheme is relatively workable. Built on a cruiser hull, your listed armor is 9 to 100 millimeters of armor, and if we look at the values here, we can see just a lot of blue, which means you're going to take HE damage by just about everything that manages to hit you there. Your belt isn't incredible and will get easily penned by AP by just about anything at typical engagement ranges, but backing that up, your citadel is not very exposed and is behind a turtleback. It's hard to tell if this is at waterline or slightly beneath it. I believe it's slightly beneath it. In any case, this is far from perfect, and if you've ever shot Hipper or Parseval, you kind of know what to expect when shooting at this. As we move into talking about Graf Zeppelin's airgroups, there's two stories to tell. The first is they don't look bad on paper. With 2300 HP for her torpedo bombers and 3200 HP for her dive bombers, she's got reasonably healthy planes. The top speed for both is 189 knots, which is tied for fastest in the game. You actually do get an extra 333 damage over Parseval per torpedo and 400 more per AP dive bomb. This may appear to be a fair trade for both starting with fewer planes on deck and having a longer aircraft restoration time. That may also be profoundly wrong. While your planes here do show the same max speed as the Parseval, they're actually 9 knots slower at cruising speed when you're not using your engine boost, and you start with one less of them. In terms of stats on screen, this isn't a big deal, but more on that to come in just a moment. When looking at dive bombers, you start with 3 less of these on deck. They're also the same 9 knots slower than Parsevals, and though the bomb damage is greater, you attack with only 2 at a time, so each strike maxes out at only 70% of the damage that Parseval can do. This is only theoretical though, because the real number is probably lower. Graf Zeppelin has this weird targeting reticle. I've alluded to this before, but I'm not wholly convinced that this is an advantage. The actual area where the bombs may land may be smaller. I want to believe that that is true, but since every ship in the game isn't shaped like the ridiculously stupid Russian Novgorod circular monitor ship, this actually makes hitting ships harder because every ship that we have in the game is longer than it is wide. Wargaming does say this is a potential advantage, but the dispersion is all over the place, and I would tend to think anyone interested in paying $70 for a premium carrier probably ought to know how to line up a proper bombing run. Nevertheless, even if you consider this a real advantage, I think it will probably teach you a lot of bad habits. Anyway, in my testing, this sort of targeting landed only about 75% of bombs on what I would call a stationary, approximately Graf Zeppelin sized theoretical target. Your luck in an actual game is going to be lower than that, since your target will probably be moving, trying to make you miss, and in that case you'll probably be having to dodge flak. For the purposes of testing, these were dropped as soon as fully aimed, while at the highest altitude, since that is more or less the height you'll need in order to citadel several battleships in the game. Even then, I wouldn't say it's a reliable penetration, and if you're willing to do a lot less damage, you might be able to aim in a little bit more than what I did for this test. Nevertheless, if you're looking at this graphic and thinking it looks weird, yes, the targeting reticle is an approximation at best, and about 5% of your bombs don't even land within this big circular visual indicator given to you, at least from what I can tell. Long and short of it though, the fact is that GZ has a circular targeting reticle, and that means that if you know how to line up a shot, you're pretty much worse off in Graf Zeppelin than you would be in Parseval. The aiming circle is considerably larger than a Tier 7 battleship, and at least the legendary battleships that we have in game today, where you might normally be able to guarantee near 100% bomb accuracy, even if the targeting reticle is technically larger on Parseval. Hitting anything smaller is considerably harder, and just like Parseval's AP bombs, you are prone to overpenetrating your target. The next major problem is that these planes suck at turning. That might seem unprofessional. They're really, really bad at it. Testing all Tier 7 planes, the average turn time of a Tier 7 aircraft without Graf Zeppelin is 11.2 seconds. Meanwhile, GZ clocks in at an astonishing 15.2. Given the average amount of AA, that means you're going to take well over 1,000 points of extra damage just to make a turn, not to mention flak, plus whatever time you need to get your planes back on target, given how huge these turns are. Yeah, you might not be on target. The average plane turns in around 1,200 meters. Graf Zeppelin's planes turn around 1,800 meters, essentially 50% wider. Effectively, this means, though on paper your planes appear to have good HP, relative to other carriers, the amount you would have to discount in order to make up for their poor maneuverability actually makes them perhaps the weakest of all Tier 7 air groups. Either that, or you have to spend a lot of time pre-dropping almost all of your planes and taking only a single attack run in. That is going to greatly reduce the Graf Zeppelin's usefulness for anything other than spotting. While the primary task of any carrier is to boost the effectiveness of the rest of your team, most of them find time to do damage too, and every ship other than Graf Zeppelin will have an easier time doing this. Artillery is typically where Graf Zeppelin shines, but she's been pruned pretty significantly on Legends. The good news is that with 5-kilometer range, she does outrange most, but not all, of the other carriers, and she does have the third highest potential DPM. For what it's worth, the Graf Zeppelin is said to have improved accuracy versus other ships, but if you're expecting anything close to PC, your range here is 1.25 kilometers shorter, your twin 105s reload more than 2 seconds slower, and your casemate guns are a full 2 seconds slower on the reload, meaning on PC, where the ship is not considered very good, that has 30% more firepower in this department at 25% longer ranges. And the memes, which make the Graf Zeppelin occasionally fun and unique on PC, simply are not nearly as possible in Legends. For being a purpose-built carrier, Zeppelin's AA rating is pretty poor. It's not catastrophic, because planes striking you will start to feel your presence at 4.5 kilometers, but where Parsifal puts all of its AA on the board by 4.5 kilometers, the Graf Zeppelin only has about half as much DPS, even by the time you get within 2 kilometers. This puts you just above Kaga, Shokaku, and Saipan. Ultimately, it's hard to be too worried about this number, since your combat air patrol is likely to greatly compensate for your carrier's relative inability to effectively defend itself. Where maneuverability goes, Graf Zeppelin is pretty decent. 32 knots is about the standard for a Tier 7 carrier, and the 1140 meters in a turn is just a bit wider than average. Just like the 13.7 seconds on your rudder is just a little bit faster than average. Against the Parsifal, you do manage 0.2 knots of increased speed for 0.7 seconds worse of a rudder, and neither of those stats you are likely to notice in game. Graf Zeppelin has excellent concealment though, tying the Shokaku for detection from both air and sea for being the most hidden carrier in the game at Tier 7 right now, and may help cover up the fact that your aircraft carrier doesn't really have incredible AA. Alright, and as we get going, we're going to be watching a game on Sleeping Giant. There we are in the Graf Zeppelin. We are just looking around, seeing what's going on our team and on the enemy team. A good habit to be in if you're in a carrier. That's probably the last sensible thing you'll see me do as a carrier player for a good long while. This is actually nowhere close to a well-played game, but this is the game that kinda broke me on this ship. In any case, we'll go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. I struggle to rationalize how to build this ship because boosting dive bomber HP gets you more HP than boosting torpedo bombers, which is a good thing for loitering over targets, but when asked to actually hit something and do some damage, the torpedo bombers are much, much better. So it makes sense that you might want to make the most out of those. In any case, I am not defending this build, and the long and short of it is that trying to actually play this as an aircraft carrier rather than a meme machine, which might be a mistake. Might be a mistake. In any case, you can see we first wanted to go around to the outside of A because we figured we could use that island for some cover. That doesn't look like it's going to be a good idea because it does look like there are a couple of destroyers over there who probably would like to do terrible things to me. If you did catch at the very beginning of this, that pretty much all of the enemy destroyers have decent AA. One of them has very good AA. So my targets of opportunity are Megami, Surrey, York, and Nelson, only because it's a very large target. So after swinging out towards A, we see that there are two very stealthy boats that are shooting lots at us. We decide to circle back towards the other side of the game, assuming that that's a Skiona and Friesland together, which would be really bad. It looks like one of them is over here, and then the other one's a ZF6, which also could have DFAA. And so we just throw a whole bunch of planes at a problem and don't really cause any solutions. And there you can hear our last torpedo detach, and nothing happened, which is nice. Now we're going to take off with our dive bombers. We're going to try to finish off this Surrey because it is short on life and It's also next to another cruiser. That's not real good if I miss this. It is actually pretty easy to miss. If you see the amount of room on any side of the ship where I can miss, it's pretty considerable. And now we're circling back around. This is usually the time when I use evasive maneuvers to hopefully make this a little bit more doable. We're going to come in low on the York because it has a pretty weak citadel. And even at very, very low altitude, we totally overpen it and miss once, doing a remarkable 700 damage. One of the things that I find really annoying about this ship is the bomb reticle is so wide that you can almost only semi-reliably target battleships. And if you are only able to target battleships, then what is the point of you? And then, of course, they also have the best AA, and your planes just don't have the hit points or the maneuverability to hold up to it. In this case, we're coming in on the Nelson. The Nelson is probably the ship I should want to pick on the most. We let our torpedoes out there early. And you can kind of tell this is early in my testing of this particular ship because I lead him as though I have 55 knot torpedoes. I don't. I have 45 knots. And even this is a little too far back on the ship. We're probably only going to get a couple of hits there instead of all three. Unfortunate. No flooding. That's not really surprising the more that you play this ship. But a little disappointing because it's not going to help our damage game at all. There we can see the Weimar finally takes out the York, which is nice. We need to be careful because that ship over there is the Baltimore, and he means bad news for me on a lot of levels. We are going to go ahead and drop our bombs, even though the Nelson explodes a tenth of a second, 0.2 of a second before then. And then we're going to go on to bigger and better things. Those things being this Megami. You can see out of habit, I continue to line up north and south on these things, realizing only towards the end that I don't really need to. We drop 2 aimed shots on him. We miss both, which is great. The bright side about this particular ship that I'm targeting is that it does not have incredible AA, though it does seem to be working just fine. I mean, that drop wasn't perfectly on the center line, but it wasn't that bad. We get only one hit, and of course we're still struggling here. We're still struggling. Our team is falling apart, and I am in a bad place where I've got a Baltimore coming in on C. I really don't want the Baltimore to get C. He's coming in hard, and he should. This Baltimore player is doing everything he's supposed to do, and he's really dominated the center of the map, and he's ruining my whole day. We drop on him, but he clearly has dodged. Another unfortunate thing about having slower torpedoes, they are considerably easier to dodge. A small critique of my own performance here. I should have turned to the right. There are 2 things that you can do when you're this close to not playing the game. I mean, the edge of the map. If you actually turn into the border, you can actually make these planes turn around on a dime. And I should have wanted to attack from the other side, or just a little bit further out. You'll see why in just a second. Line up again. We finally get a decent hit on a ship. Now we're going to turn around and just take a ton of damage as we come back in. That 1,000 damage extra that you take just making a turn in this versus anything else is based on the average of all ships. So that includes things like the Udaloi. Reality is that a lot of people are going to play American ships, and those American ships tend to have pretty good AA. This time we do the smart thing and turn to the left. This is maybe the only reasonably intelligent thing that I do in this game. And that is, I am trying to convince this guy that I've sailed off into the corner and try to get him to not follow me. So now you can see our squadron is detected. Alright. Good, yes. And unfortunately we needed like an extra 50, 100 meters because he catches me. You can see he's already rotating his turrets around to engage me off of his port side. Instead, he's going to be able to turn back and start shooting me a whole lot, which is unfortunate because now we are going to die. And we were hoping to make our deaths. We were hoping to make our death take a little bit more time. I think this should be a pretty good angle. I'm apparently completely wrong. So anyway, sad times. He continues to pepper my ship with AP. My angle should work until I hit the border, which is not going to take a whole heck of a lot of time. And now we're going to see if we can't hit a cruiser with all this stuff. And we're going to lose probably most of the last of our planes on this, because that's just how this game is going. We've got our evasive maneuvers up, so we're hoping to be able to drop 2 sets of bombs on him here. Just then was about the time that you would expect, if you were on PC, that your secondaries would start to engage. For whatever improved secondary accuracy means, I did have a few occasions where ships sailed inside of 5 kilometers. Against battleship-sized targets, my secondary scored 44 hits on 84 shots, which is just a bit above 50%, at 3 to 4 kilometers of range. The effect on target was only 4,439 damage. Against a destroyer, I had around half as many hits, even though the destroyer hit an island, which one would think would help my gunners hit something. Not entirely true. And I still had to kill him with torpedoes. I guess my point is here that there's really no reason to take the fun out of this ship if its Airgroup is going to be so horrible. One of the things that the Graf Zeppelin does have pretty good on PC is its rocket planes. Thankfully, we don't have rocket planes. And I would think that if you gave me 6.25 kilometers there, I still get sunk by that cruiser. It doesn't change the outcome of this game, but it would make me feel better about my life. Now, the one nice thing about this particular match, and one reason why I feature it, is because there's a Graf Zeppelin on the other team, and it is because of that questionable accuracy. If you think it's just me, I can assure you it's not. I was always happy to see an enemy Graf Zeppelin because I knew he's on the same struggle bus as me, and I never really saw one score all that well. And unfortunate for him, this ship kind of lets him down. Those are pretty well aimed shots. They appear, and the game ticks on to victory. We only did 60,000 damage. That is strangely a very consistent thing that I've experienced in this ship. Usually it's not hard to get 100,000 damage in a carrier. This one is a bit challenging. And Duffy 250 goes on to win the game. He had a great game. I'm sure he had a lot more fun than I did. So closing thoughts on Graf Zeppelin. On the Stuka dive sirens, it would be nice if they were a little louder so you could actually hear them over the sound of your planes breaking apart. It would also be nice if the planes were any good at all. So that's also a thing. This was a profoundly frustrating ship for me to review. Maybe you could tell. And at one point, I almost sold it just to make myself feel better about it. But I imagine they will probably alter some of its characteristics in the future. As we saw in the last update, balancing carriers remains hard. And so we're just a few days past the point where they changed every tier 7 carrier again as a ship that you have to pay $70 for. I don't think they want to put it into a position where they have to nerf it like they just did with the Saipan, but for right now you have to live with it as it is. Relative to other carriers, Graf Zeppelin is not in a good place. You didn't hear me say it's the worst tier 7 carrier, but you probably also won't see me arguing against anybody who'd like to make that argument. I'm not really sure why it needed to be made worse than it is on PC when it already isn't really considered competitive there. Long and short of it is, I have more fun in both of the carriers that you can earn for free in the Bureau. They both are a lot better than this, particularly after the HP adjustment to Kaga's planes. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Graf Zeppelin. Thanks for bearing with me on this one. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.